Talking to Cornelius. Conversation 2. I was just looking at a current map of Belfast. I wonder what you'd make of it, old man. I doubt you'd be surprised by the walls that run through the inner suburbs, a material last resort to maintain some semblance of peace in the thick of ancient grievances. The town's as divided now as in your day, but you didn't have walls back in 1843. I imagine you lived in that area called the Pound, a fast-growing, high-density, poorly housed world of Catholics drawn to West Belfast to work in the mills and factories. All those incoming Catholics pushing against the Protestant enclaves of Sandy Row and Shankhill Road. I think of you and your siblings, pimply adolescents in a powder-keg town. Home was an overcrowded tenement building. A family's living space was a single room at best. That was your island, a pressed-in world that stank from overspilling sewerage, that was frequently ravaged by typhus and the brute impact of long hours spent in bad work conditions. But there was room to breathe and life to be relished in the boisterous world of the streets. Singers on the corners with their latest ballads about Dan O'Connell and his push to repeal the Union and win back Irish self-government. Information came through the singing. Binding identity and political fire was delivered through the lyrics. Rise, Irishman, rise and awake from your slumber. No longer be tardy or fond of delay. Show union and strength with your millions in number, and seek what's your right in a peaceable way. These 43 years you have bent to oppression, since to London John Bull did your parliament steal, and every year since proved worse in succession. Then rise and cry out for immediate repeal. All the while, as the street singers performed and roving pickpockets exercised their nimble fingers, groups of boys and girls eyed each other, some putting on a show to impress, some throwing out a critical aside to stir things up, and all the air full of gossip and rumour about the goings-on around town. The overcrowded tenements suggested an enormous city, but in 1843 the town was still little more than 75,000 people, a segregated country town with a handful of mills and factories, crowded enough to cause combustion, but small enough for news to travel fast. No sooner would word go around that a Protestant minister was preaching all manner of hate about Catholics down at the town hall steps than a mob of pimply Catholic kids were prizing up cobblestones, girls collecting rocks in their aprons, self-appointed leaders barking instructions and calling out names to come outside and join the numbers. Apart from the cobblestones and rocks, there was also that weapon that criminal records euphemistically describe as sticks. In reality, they were thick knotted shillelaghs made to swing hard and break bones. There was a primitive art to the swing, block, thrust and feint when shillelagh-armed men faced each other in combat, but most of the time the attacks were brutally one-sided acts, resulting in serious injury or death. 1843. What a year, old man. Do you still remember it? O'Connell called it the year of repeal. There was major activity across the country. Tens of thousands gathered at the Liberators' monster rallies to call for Ireland to regain an independent government. But the whole thing was a tightrope walk, with the leaders emphasising peaceful protest and well-reasoned argument. They didn't want the call for repeal to be seen as an act of rebellion. But that type of political nuance didn't feature highly on the poorer streets of your town. The Protestants of Sandy Row were far from happy. Their world had been steadily turning upside down since the rollback of the penal laws. Letting Catholics own guns, join the army, practice law, have free rein with their religion, and then the ultimate travesty of letting native Catholics vote and take up seats in Parliament. And, on top of that, the government was clamping down on the marching season, as though the loyal Orange Order was the problem. Faithful Unionists were being punished, while the rebellious Romish mobs were being given free rein. It was madness giving power to the enemy. The whole thing was tempting fate. And with all those Catholics pouring into town, Belfast was the front line. The Orangemen fingered memories the way Catholics fingered beads. 1641, 1689, 1690. Just citing the years was enough to make the threat of future massacres vivid. We'd all have been killed if not for William of Orange. We will be killed soon enough if his memory isn't celebrated, and if we don't assert our strength and power, marching where we choose, and showing the savages who's boss. The politicians don't understand the threat in London. They don't see the danger wrapped up in the likes of Dan O'Connell and his monster rallies. Your final months of Irish freedom were spent in that volatile world. July was always a troubled time. Feelings would have been all the more volatile in 1843 due to the Orangemen copping a prohibition of their march on the 12th. The July 18 Belfast newsletter said the riot that broke out was the worst one since 1835. On Friday evening, a large number of persons belonging to Sandy Row assembled immediately opposite Christchurch for the purpose of preventing a large body of Roman Catholics which was marching towards them from the Pound, from wrecking the church and Succession Meeting House. The two parties met and forthwith commenced a most serious riot, throwing stones, breaking windows, and committing other depredations, which started for a considerable length of time. In the course of the night, the respective parties burned effigies of King William III and Dan O'Connell, and such was the ill feeling manifested that it required the united efforts of the magistracy and the police to keep them from committing further violence. The pro-O'Connell Vindicator saw the riot from a different point of view on July the 19th. In our last, we gave some account of the brutalities practised by the Orange anti-repealers. Today, we regret to say that we must record still greater excesses on the part of the miscreant mobs of Sandy Row and the adjacent localities. On Friday and Saturday nights, they assembled in great numbers and committed a series of the most unprovoked aggressions, exclusively against the Catholics. On the latter night, they wrecked 18 houses in Cullentry Road, smashing the windows, doors and furniture of the unfortunate inmates. In one instance, they attacked the house of a poor Catholic named Cosgrave, a shoemaker, who was lying in the last stage of consumption, and when his wife implored them to desist, unless they wished to murder him, she was answered with ruffian shouts of "Damn the papist! He's going to hell, and we'll only send him there faster." All of that happened in July. And then in September, you and your brother did that thing that changed your entire destiny. It's shaped the destiny of every generation of your descendants since. But that's a whole other conversation. How much of that violent world did you carry in your memories, old man? How much did it shape the way you read the world? What traces of those Belfast days and nights have lingered barely recognised through our generations.